You're listening to Lyfe and Shyt. I'm Daneyel Walker.
And I'm Tommy Walker.
Join us as we talk about our journey overcoming fears, boundaries, marriage, family, lifestyle, business, and whatever other shit you can think of.
We're individuals that came together to create one unit with one mind and one goal.
Hey.
What's up, girl?
How are you?
I am outstanding.
How is this day doing to you?
I'm still living living in cloud 9 because it's anniversary month.
Ooh.
Yeah, we rocking.
Yeah, still feeling those vibes.
That's right.
I love it.
All weekend, all month, every day.
Yes. Happy anniversary to us. Love you.
I love you, girl.
I got a question for you.
Hit me.
Do you believe in generational curses?
Excuse me. I don't believe in curses. No, but
That's deep.
I do believe in generational habits.
Okay.
And we're gonna dig into that as we talk about generational curses and habits. But it's like one of those things that we've always heard is like Bruce Lee, how his family was supposed to have this curse on them, which is weird, of what happened to him and then what happened to his son. So people do believe in generational curses.
Well, I don't know about that.
So as fit and healthy as Bruce Lee was, he just died out of nowhere, right?
Okay.
So it was a question of like what happened, and then for his son to have passed away, and he was killed on set. It was an accidental set. So it was Hollywood tried to make it seem like like what did these two, like father son, what did these two deserve? It had to been some type of curse, and that was a thing for a long time. Yeah, it was a trip.
That's crazy. It's funny when you said that, it made me think of the curse that was on a team. Is it a baseball team? Or?
Oh yeah, you talk about the Boston Red Sox.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that. I remember everyone like, the curse is broken, and I was like, what? And they're like, oh, they traded somebody some years ago, and ever since then there's this curse. And that's funny, but that's not a generational curse, right? But that's something that was passed down for years, apparently.
Yeah. Well, granted, being from New York, everything out of Boston is cursed. So I'm sorry if y'all listen.
So they say.
Sorry, but I'm a New York Knicks fan, a Yankee fan, and we just had that. I had to throw that.
Funny. So growing up, it felt like generational curses were huge. They were big. It was like, that's that generational curse. Like, you need to break the curse, or don't be like this, or when you were growing up, did it feel like, I don't know why it doesn't feel like such a big deal now? Is it because we're grown and no one's telling us this, or we're not now like saying that same thing to our children?
I know. For me, I don't think it was. I don't think we even had that awareness of like things were the way they were because of origin. In my family, I guess it was the sense of, this is just the way it is, right? And so we didn't think of generational. And then and to put that into perspective, like, what is a generation, right? So a generation is basically 20 to 30 years when everybody's living together.
Yeah, I just think as my mom, like my generation would be like my mom, and then what my mom's mom did, right?
Exactly.
It was like, that's the generation, and what did my mom do, and what became, like how you said with Bruce Lee and his son, right? It's like, okay, what happened to him happens to you, and is that the generation, and is that what our generations do? So It's like, hey, if my mama did it, does that mean that I do it too, right?
So a generation is considered, so like how you said, you all to your grandmother. Now, if you happen to have your great grandmother, that's outside of the generation. That's outside of your generation. So your generation is your grandmother, your mother, you, and then your children, and that's considered the generation. And then if you think about the habits of that, that's where the generational curses come into play.
And it's the generations of the time of like each person, right? So if it's my grandma or my great grandma, then it's what she did, right? And then it comes from this like biblical places, right? Because in the Bible, they talk about the generations, like from it just makes it seem like your generation. Well, actually, I know exactly from Matthew 1:17, right? It talks about Abraham, his generations to David, and then it talks about for 14 generations generations from David into the captive of Babylon, then the 14 days. Like, it's just generation after generation after generation. So it makes it seem as if like God is looking at you and your generations and your mama and your grandmama. And then when you're done, like, he's going to look at your kids and look at you and say, well, what did you do? Right? Like, what did you do to change the way that the generation was going? Right. And I think that the way that the generational like talents or blessings is like either like talents that are passed down, abilities that are passed down, right, or traits, different traits.
So why they don't say these are generational talents? Like, I've never heard that term.
Or generational blessings.
Yeah.
Like generational wealth is a thing, right? And I guess
Exactly.
that's the same thing as like blessings. It depends on what that blessing is.
so I mean, but it's a great point. Like, you know, whenever you hear somebody talking, and it's usually always a negative thing of like, oh, that's, you know, that's been in my family for years, but the positive side never come in. And I got to ask you the question: do you believe in generational curses?
I do. I do. Growing up, it was a thing in our family for everyone to have their children early, right? So it was like everyone had their kids.
What's early mean? 15,
before 18.
Oh.
So I was like, I want to be the one to have my child like
on purpose.
Before. I don't think it was a purposely thing. I just think it was a generational thing that was unconscious.
So happens.
Yeah, that was just unconscious. That just kind of happened to us, you know. And to me, that's like the spiritual world of it, right? It's just like you got caught into this way of being, and so it just so happened to be that way. So it's like, well, my mom had a child at 18, my auntie had a child at 18, so now we all have children until somebody says, no, this is not the way it will be. Okay. So it stops with me, right? So I'm not going to be that one. So growing up, I was always very cognizant of the generational curses that were around me, like not having money, not owning houses, not being married. These were all things that have happened from women in my family for years. Alcoholism. These are all things and traits that have been passed down to us that we didn't really realize. And it is a generational curse, right? One thing I know, one time I bought a ton of wine. I'm like, I'm going to stock up my wine. And I sent my aunt a picture of it, right? And then immediately she texts me back like, be careful, because when we have an access, we tend to excessively drink, you know? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? But yeah, I mean, if I didn't have a bottle of wine accessible to me daily in at my hands, then I probably wouldn't drink a bottle a day, right?
That's a good point.
So it was something she was very aware of, right? So, but then, like you said, some things like generational talents are not so well defined. Like my mom can sing, and I think those are huge things that people actually point out instead of small things. Like my dad saved money really well, and so do I. Like that's huge, right? But a talent that's kind of pushed down. Whereas if my mom sings and is Beyonce, you know what I mean? Like that's a talent that I think is a blessing, or someone would kind of big up.
That's because it's in everybody's eyes, right?
Yeah,
but then,
it's true.
Well, of course, you know, as people, we always highlight the things that go wrong, and we say like, oh, that you your mother's child. That's like that.
Okay,
that term is always, you know, is you your mother's child. You know, especially if it was something that happened that was, you know, in a negative way. And generational curses, so, and you talked about the religious sense, because not all religions think about generational curses, or they don't even believe in it, right? Because then you have like ancestral sins. And if you think about the things people say, oh, you know, certain religions, oh, the things that your ancestors did will come back to you, right? Well,
that's deep.
My ancestors was goddamn slaves. So,
yeah.
so how was, you know, how are they sins? It's and that's why for me it's about the habits.
So is it always sins?
Well,
and if ancestral, is it only sins, or I mean, because then if your ancestors like bust their ass, and you know what I mean, then wouldn't you have blessings on the other side of that?
See, and that's the thing, and that goes back to why I don't believe in the curses. And but to me, it's the habits, right? To me, because everything could be changed or broken. It's like what my great grandfather did has nothing to do with me, for a few reasons. First of all, he lived in the 1800s. I live in 2020s, right? So he didn't have the things that he had accessible to him. I do. There's a lot of different things that we don't have, and we're richer people today than our ancestors were, like on any level. Like even the, you know, people that don't consider themselves rich are richer than their ancestors were. So rich is another. It's a term, but if you think about the way that you're living right now, it's much better than your ancestors did. So from a curse standpoint, a lot of it is or habit standpoint, my term is habit, is because of education, travel, experiences. You know, in my generation, going to my grandparents, down to my parents, and then me, you know, I was the first one to go to college. And not talking outside of that, right? Not talking like my cousins and things like that, just from lineage. I was the first one to go and graduate college. So just because my grandparents didn't do it, it wasn't a curse. It was just a habit that, you know, it didn't lead to that. But I changed that.
Yeah, see, yeah, you're talking about decisions, and that's a little different, right? Whereas, like, say, if something like poverty, right? Like you come from a poor family, right? Like everyone's probably like, yeah, you can make a decision not to be poor, but you're gonna have to do some things to make that change, right?
1,000%.
Like I have a whole list of different generational curses that we could have, and I don't know if it's a decision that you have this or not, right? You don't decide like, oh, I want to grow up into poverty, like right, you don't, right?
Well,
divorce.
Poverty is one. Like my family didn't grow. You know, they didn't come from. You know, excess amount of income. They came from they made it, and that was pretty much it.
Okay, but
it was like paycheck to paycheck. You know, any given day, if I lost my job, then shit will, you know what I mean, like we'll be out.
So, in my family, I came from a place where we could be put out and live, sometimes have no place to stay, right? And of my siblings that, if you just think about it, they reflect that lifestyle, right? So to me, that's a curse in a sense, because,
or it's a decision.
Well, it is, but it's just the way that came down to them, you know. Because I decided not to, but you know, it's just I feel what you're saying. It is a decision, but it's kind of that mindset that kind of was played upon you. And if you don't never taught a different way, then how would you know that there's another decision, right? So divorce. If divorce runs in your family, or if it's a curse, right? That means that everybody's gotten divorced. Like no one's had a successful marriage, and then in a sense, then you say, well, then I guess we just don't do that. Like we don't have successful marriages, or we don't stay married past this many years, or the women in my family don't even get married. Child abuse.
Before you go on, divorce has happened in my family. You know, in my generation. So my grandparents got divorced. My parents got divorced. I got divorced. Now I am 14 years into my current marriage because I was saying, fuck this. Yeah. I'm not, you know, this is, and that's only big.
But you did get divorced though.
I did.
I mean, that was after getting divorced, right? Which was what everyone else did.
And that's because of education, right? It's because going back to the means and the understanding, and so they didn't have the means to understand what a marriage is like, what it should be like, and educating them on it. So therefore they only knew what they knew. And that's the thing about generational curses, is you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And then so you just are in it.
Yep.
And what puts you, and we could talk about what options do you have, or what is that trigger that says, fuck this. I don't want to be like that.
Yeah, how do you make the decision? How do you make the, because you say like you just make a decision, right? And it's not always that easy. Like sexual abuse, child abuse. Some people have been abused as children, and then they grow up to become abusers. You know, and that's something that's unfortunate, right? Domestic violence. People grow up either seeing their parent getting hit, and then they grow up and say, hey, like that's the way it's supposed to be. Raised. Now I get hit too, or hitting and seeing, you know. And that's something that's kind of hard. Like you just make the decision. I mean, you could, but adultery, perversion, like you could have some perverted parents or some perverted uncle, and then all of a sudden that's you. Depression, confusion. I didn't really think of confusion being a curse, but
to me,
people,
because I don't like confusion.
Yes, and I didn't understand it, but when I see confusion, and I understand like this person is generally a confused person, and they always bring confusion to anything, right? So it could be something very simple as if just stopping at the store and getting this before you come here, and now all of a sudden it's an argument, and you know it's confusion, and that's real.
But I didn't. Damn, that's. I mean, to be a generational curse, confusion. That means that goes back to your grandparents being confused,
and it's the way, wow, it's the way that their thought process, right? The way they think, and then that came to you. Fear, indecision, that's same.
Fear, definitely. And fear is one of those things where, you know, like when I was growing up, I was skipped from the 7th to the 9th grade, and I didn't want to be skipped. Now, again, going back to I was the only one in my family to go to college and graduate. I had an opportunity to excel. And instead of doing it, I said, no, I didn't want it. Well, I did it because I had to, because my parents don't fuck around.
Yeah, you didn't really have a choice. But
my parents was
you didn't want to.
Yeah, my parents looking at me like, please. But I didn't want to do it because of fear.
Right.
And fear is something that unfortunately is a curse generationally, because it's the reason why a lot of things don't happen. It's because of fear, because we were scared to make the jump.
Directly. Yep. Panic attacks. That's a deal. Growing up, I never seen anyone have. We can't downplay it. I didn't grow up seeing someone have panic attacks, or but when I did see it, I knew it was a thing. And after that, I was like, oh, like, okay. I was able to sense it when I felt it, and was like, okay, I understand what this is now and control it. But it wasn't something that I decided like, oh, I'm not going to have panic attacks. It was just something that I understood and knew how to control. Mental illness, I think that's something that.
I mean, that's like a actual science. That's an actual diagnosis.
Yeah, so, and suicide, suicide runs in families. That's also medical, right? And then destructive attitudes and behaviors. That to me is a kicker for sure, because your kids are the ones that get the most of those. And you don't really know until they get older, or until you see them interact with other children, and you're like, oh shit, like I taught them that. Or you see them getting short, or you see them getting an attitude. Like my oldest daughter, I see so much of you and me in that. Like it's, I'm like, oh, how much good did we do? And it seems like she only took the things that we weren't so proud of. The snapping part. Yeah. Well,
that's all right. So that goes back to like the children's side, right? So raising children, I would say if I was able to do it all over again, I would read. Like we had a conversation about reading books and things like that. I would have taken classes in which I really like new parents today. Read a book, take a class, whatever the case may be. Yes. Because going back to that, generationally, you do what your parents did, or you do the opposite of what your parents did.
Yes, I agree.
And either way, you know what I mean? It's just you freestyling, right? So you're going to freestyle, and that's what we did with our, at the same time, too, we were in our 20s, and you're in your 20s raising a kid. You just think about that. You're in your 20s. You're a kid. Right. Raising a kid. Right. You don't know shit.
Yeah, so. I always say when I first had my girls, we grew up together. Yeah, exactly. It was, I was a kid having a kid. So, yeah, and whatever I learned about life, I taught them, right?
I find doing more parenting today than I did in my 20s.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
So, it was in the 20s, it was more discipline. Yeah. A lot of discipline. Yeah. These are the rules. Break them, I'm gonna whip your ass. And unfortunately, our oldest daughter is just like that now. That's just like, I'll whip your ass.
Yeah. Use your whole ass, not your half ass. Oh my gosh.
But a lot of the things that you're saying, I wouldn't coin as a generational curse. Some of them, yeah, but a lot of the things, like even down to those last few, seems more things that are out of your control, because like you could be the best parent and have a kid that's an asshole or just mean and want to bite other kids in a playground.
Yeah. Well, and then what that's funny is that the other part of that to me are things that I guess you can kind of control, but I believe like things like diabetes and high blood pressure could be a generational curse as well.
And I believe against that.
That's because it's like my mama cooked this chicken and she seasoned it this way for years, and so now I do, and now everybody had high blood pressure for years, and now I do, or she's always made that sweet, delicious cake, and I made it for years, and now we all have diabetes.
See, so now in my eyes, that's a generational habit.
Yes,
right. Yes. So because we all use Lowry seasoned salt, and no pun to Lowry's, that's just what it is. Yeah. You know what I mean? Now imagine if you cook like a Mediterranean style, or if granted, if you cooked Caribbean style with spices instead of salt.
Yeah, and then, that's why you see a whole. No offense to people who are big or anything like that, or chubby, or I'm just saying, or skinny, but like you see a family and it's all chubby people, it's because that's the way they eat. How you eat. And people, it's all skinny. It's like, and then you see the one skinny person, you're like, you made different decisions, and then you see the one chubby one, you're like, well, you made different decisions, right? Or yes, you broke the curse.
Exactly. Now, what were you going to say?
No, I was going to say, it's funny when we say, like, you're just like your mom, right? So if your mom does bad things, or if your dad did bad things, like your dad's a drunk, and then you do something similar to that, and it's like, oh, you're a drunk just like your dad. But if your dad's successful, then that's even harder to follow. So I feel like it's easier for generational curses to be mean or bad or evil, but for them to be good, it doesn't seem like that happens to you. It seems like you have to work for it, right? So if your dad's rich and he doesn't just give you the money, then you have to actually work to become rich, right?
Yeah.
It's not like it's just but like, because of all the things that I gave that were generational curses, they were all bad, right? So like, what would be the flip side of that?
Well, and that's one of the things where, in my eyes, I broke a lot of the habits. Okay. And now teaching my children how to take these new habits on and create new traditionals, so that they're not curses, like the poverty, living paycheck to paycheck, not investing, not saving money, education, entrepreneurship. These are all things that I broke those habits. But now, shit, they can easily be switched back to the way that, was before me. And yes, we try to create these new ways so that they won't become a curse. But shit, if it's too hard, like you're saying, then let me go back to the easy way. And you don't even know what those easy ways were. Yeah. So that now those habits literally skipped a generation, skipped over. And now you're doing them because in your eyes, what I'm doing is too hard.
That makes sense. And like, meditating is something that I want to share and change, right? Because I feel like my generations before, they went to church, they stayed in church, and that's kind of what I started our family in, was church. And then from that, like doing meditation, getting to know yourself. And so these are generational things that I'm bringing. Yoga, doing yoga. No one ever talked about doing yoga. No one ever talked about working out. So these are all different things that, yes, mindfulness. These are all different things that we are bringing to change our generation, or the things that our generations to come learn. Yeah.
Now, addictions and things like that, that's where I say it becomes a choice. So addictions, the way you eat, different, like you said, the health concerns. To me, all of those are all concerned, because once you realize, all right, my grandmother had diabetes. Well, this is how you prevent diabetes. That's it. Well, let me not do those things, right? Now, granted, you may have grown up to the age of 18, 21 by doing all those things. And unfortunately, if you don't catch it or if you don't change, then you're going to follow that same track, right? But if you change it and you take corrective action early, then you won't fall into that line. I mean, there's other things that they blame is in your hereditary, but for me, I don't let what my ancestors did be my trajectory. Like, let my own decisions and my own habits be my trajectory, and then let me try and pour those positive or turned around habits and rituals into my children, so it could be their trajectory. And at the same time, their trajectory is going to be different from my trajectory. But I don't want to pour into them things that I know that can poison them and just be overindulging that will kill their souls eventually. That's how I look at that.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. It goes to what my quote is, like, it's up to us to break generational curses, right? So when they say that it runs in the family, you tell them basically, like, this is where it runs out. So yeah, it runs in the family, but this right here is where it all runs out. Like, no more to that, right? Like, it's done.
And that's great, because you took my final. That's my final. Is don't let that be an excuse. Like, when people, it runs in my family. Like, don't let that be an excuse. Like, you literally can change everything that's happened to you, even now. Like, even if you're listening to this today and you're saying, oh, because this happened to my grandfather, this is why I am where I am. Or because this happened to my mother, this happened to my brother. Like, no matter who or what something else happened to, and you feel like that's the reason and the cause for where you are, you literally have the capacity to change that right now. And that's what you should do.
Yes, it's just like you said, you have the ability to do something different, right? So this is what they did, so now I'm going to do the total opposite, and then you will get a total different result. This is Lyfe and Shyt.
Lyfe and Shyt. Do us a favor. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Leave a review. Let us know what your thoughts are. That's the only way that this show is going to be successful, and we appreciate you. Talk with you next time.